So this week's Shiur is a mitzvah in this week's Parsha, but it is also in Yonah de Yoima. And today is a very special day to me because I've been promising everyone for the past few months that the new Sefer on Shvi'is is expected to come out in a short while. And it took time, again and again. Finally, Baruch Hashem, the Sefer came out. And today's Shiur is based on what I wrote in the new Minchas Osha on Shvi'is that I'm holding in my hand. Baruch Hashem, a simcha gedola. Every new Sefer is like a new child. I say that many times. And even if you have 35 Svarim, it's still a tremendous simcha. So Baruch Hashem, this week's Parshat, V'hashvi'is tishmatena v'nitashto. V'achlu evyoinei amecho v'yislam toichal chayis asoda. So today we will be discussing one of the fundamental topics in Shemitah v'yovel in Hilchos Shvi'is, Hefker Peiris Shvi'is. So the Achronim have a discussion. Is it Afkata de Malka or is it a mitzvah upon the Gavra? Is the mitzvah upon the individual? You need to be mafkir the Peiris, or the Torah is mafkir the Peiris. You just need to go along, and you need to enable anyone who wants to come and take your fruit to do so. Minchas Chinuch Mitzvah Pei Daled. They deal with this question. Are there any nafkaminas l'halacha? Of course there are. Very fundamental and very simple ones. Number one, does a person need to be mafkir? Does he need to say and bear in mind and yoitzi b'svosav peiris sheli hem hefker, or no? All he needs to do is not prevent anyone from taking advantage and benefit from the fruit that grows in his field and his trees. If a person is not a medakter mitzvahs and he was not mafkir the peiris, would there be an isur gezel? If the Torah is mafkir, then there is no gezel. But if the mitzvah is upon him and he didn't perform his mitzvah, it's not yours. It is his, and there might be gezel. And what is it in cherei shoyta v'kotten? They don't have das and they cannot be mafkir. So one would ask, if they can't be mafkir, they don't have das, so how did they purchase a field? They did not. They inherited a tree or a field with peiris. And everybody could inherit. You don't need das to do so. And those would be the nafkaminas l'halacha. So both the Pesach Shulchan and the Minchas Chinuch maintain that this is a machloikis, the Mabit and the Bes Yosef, and the famous argument, the halachic discussion, Peiris nochram b'yeretz Yisrael, do they have Kedusha Shvi'is? People aren't aware that the point of conflict between the Bes Yosef and the Mabit was regarding Tumas HaMaisis. The Mabit maintains that there is Kedusha Shvi'is, so the Peiris are potam Tumas HaMaisis, and the Bes Yosef said, no, Peiris Nachram are chayiv b'Tumas HaMaisis. So the Mabit says, even Peiris growing in the field of a goy are Hefker, because the Torah is mafkir. So the Mabit's opinion seemed to be clear, Fkata de Malka. The Bes Yosef says, no, fruit growing in the field that belongs to a goy is not Hefker. So the Achronim I mentioned maintain that is the machlokes. According to the Bes Yosef, it is upon the Gavra. And a goy doesn't have the mitzvah of Shvi'is, so it's not Hefker. The Mabit says it's Afkata de Malka. I disagree. And to me, Poshet l'kuli alm, it's Afkata de Malka, and not a mitzvah upon the Gavra. Because when we closely examine and we learn the Bes Yosef, the Mabit is in Chelek Aleph Siman Yud Aleph, and the Bes Yosef Avkas Roichel Siman Chov Gimel. But when we closely examine the Bes Yosef says, and I'm reading this Loshen, V'yafel gav de Rachmona Afkara, even the Iulo Afkara Chayeves. Yes, Rachmona Afkara, the Torah was mafkar. But if the owner doesn't let people in and he is not mafkar, it's still Chayev b'Tumas HaMaisis. Not because the Torah isn't mafkar, because he needs to go along. Afal gav de Rachmona Afkara. And then the Bes Yosef says another argument, the Torah isn't mafkar the Peiris only in a Jewish field, because he is chayiv b'mitzvahs, not a guy. So the Bes Yosef agrees, Rachmona Afkara. Afal Piken, his opinion is either because it is also required that the Bailam be a mafker, and maybe the Torah B'chal wasn't mafker peiris of a guy that is not chayiv mitzvah. Shish maintains that yes, it is afkata de malka, and I think the Chazon Ish is definitely right. And I want to discuss 7 different sugyas. Bekitzer nimitz. L'chor it's a Gemara mefureshes, bova metzia lametes. The Gemara deals, what does the basin do with nechasim netushin and nechasim retushim, R and noon? We're dealing with fields, real estate. The owner just fled. He's nowhere to be found. He's in a distant country. And the Gemara asks, what is the difference between the 2 definitions, retushim or nitushim? And the Gemara says netushim is when the owner had to run away. He was in trouble. It's not because he decided to tour the world and to enjoy, and that is why he took a cruise. He had to flee. And the Gemara says the lashon of netushim is based on the pasuk Shvi'is tishmeteno v'nitashto afkata de malka. So the Gemara clearly says Hefker Shvi'is is afkata de malka. And Dafka, the Makor that is most explicit and most clear, in my opinion, proves nothing, proves 0. And sometimes the same words in Chazal have a totally different connotation and different meaning than the same words Befiha Achroinim. There's another Gemara in Bava Metzira, Kuvav Amud Aleph, and the Gemara there also deals with Dinei Shvi'is, and the Gemara there also uses the words Afkata da Malka, and it has a totally different meaning. Because Kuvav Amud Aleph, the sugya is Isser Avodas Ha'oretz, the prohibition to work the land. Avodas Ha'oretz, Avodas Ha'oretz, and the Gemara calls that Afkata da Malka. And that has nothing to do with Hefker, has nothing to do with Kinyan, has nothing to do with ownership. What does this definition mean? Afkata da Malka. Rashi writes the Flametes Mitzvahs HaMelech. In other words, anything that is imposed on you would be defined Afkata de Malka. So it doesn't mean that the Torah is mafkir, but it is imposed. It's not your free will. It's not your free choice. And therefore, if the owner had to run away, that is Afkata de Malka. No one took away his field, but he needed to leave, and that is called Afkata de Malka. Isser Avodas Ha'oretz is Afkata da Malka. So Afkata da Malka doesn't mean that the Torah is mafker, your peiris, but the Torah imposes on you to be mafker. So this source proves nothing, but I still think there are 6 different sources. Let's start off with the Rambam. Perek Daled, Shmita V'Yover Alocha Chov Daled. And I'm reading the Lashon of the Rambam. Mitzvah Sasei Lahashmet Kol Ma Shetoitzi Oretz V'Shvi'is Shenema V'Oretz Tishmetena V'Nitashto V'Kol Hanoi Al Karmoi V'Hasag Sedeu B'Shvi'is Bitel Mitzvahs Asei. How does one violate the Mitzvah Sasei? Why doesn't the Rambam say Kol Animna Melahafkir Bitel Mitzvah Sasei? This proves no. Your mitzvah is not to be mafkir. The only way to be mevatel, violate this mitzvah, is hanoi el karmoi v'asag sedeu. The mitzvah is linoig minag hefker, not to be mafkir, and therefore it is only one that closes a door, that doesn't let anyone into his field. He doesn't let people take benefit from his fruit. He is the one that is mevatel mitzvah saseh. He's not required to be mafkir. There's a Mishnah in Klein, Perek Zayin Mishnah Hey. Hazoreya Klein, Shvi'is doesn't have the power to prohibit ein Adam oiser davar she'eino shaloi. Obviously, he's not very observant. He's not a big tzaddik, because otherwise he wouldn't be noitea Klein. It's a lav. So probably he wasn't mafke the Peres either. But still, ein Adam oiser davar she'eino shaloi. Those fruits are not yours, and you don't have the power to answer them. That is source number 2. Source number 3 is Yerushalmi and Shvi'is Yud Omid Beis, a Machloikis in Yerushalmi. Me'emesai Odam Zoicha bePeirotav. Let me note, Peirotav. The sugya is, person collects fruit from his own field. Are they his or not? One opinion says, yeah. The other says no. He mistakenly thinks that the fruit is his, so he doesn't bear in mind, he doesn't have intention to do a kinyan, and therefore he is not koina. Peirotav. Both the Pnei Moshe and the Kor made him a farish. Person collects fruit from his own field, and obviously he wasn't mafkir. Because he thinks they're his. That's what the Yerushalmi says. But they're not his, and therefore he's not zoicha. This proves he wasn't mafkir, but still the peiros are hefker. Another Yerushalmi pe'achov heyom adalef. The Yerushalmi is specific hefker based in which is hefker. Does it pata tumas amaises? Now Yerushalmi wants to prove that the Chachamim added on another month. They turned Shnas Shvi'is to a leap year. There's another month, and that month is instituted by Chachamim. That's hefker based, and it's pata tumas amaises. If the entire concept of hefker is that the Torah gives us a mitzvah, you need to be mafker, that's not hefker based in. That is hefker shel habaylim. So obviously, it is the koyach HaTorah that's mafker. And that added month is koyach hachumim, that is hefker based in. There's no other way to understand this Yerushalmi. Nedora mem beis amid beis. Amud ranoah mechaveiroi. Can't go into his field because you cannot be nana from him. That's a neder. But you could still take the fruit because the fruit afkera. How could you take the fruit if you can't go into the field? It is a tree standing at the edge of the field, and the branches go over to the Reshus Harabim. So obviously, you could always take from his fruit. It is always hefker. You don't need to inquire, was he mafker or not. Most of the Rishonim have a gersa, Rachmona Afkara. The Torah was mafker. So, 5 different sources. Number 6 is a savora. Eino da mafker dovashiyena shaloi. The Ktsois Reish Yudalef rejects the Bach. The Bach says a cursed person could be mafker dovashiyena boli yolam, not dovashiyena shaloi. But the Ktsois is right because it's a gemor meforeshes bo v'kama samechtes. Just like Eino da makdish dovashiyena boli yolam, Eino da makne dovashiyena boli yolam, Eino da mafker dovashiyena boli yolam. So if the mitzvah would be upon the person to be mafkir, he would go out to the field every other day and check which fruits already are Kiddush Shvi'is, which developed. Shlish, Chanota. We don't find that chiyuv anywhere. Einu de mafkir dova shaloi boli yolim. This proves you don't need to be mafkir. You just need to let anyone collect, pluck the fruit off your trees, kiritzainoi. If you would be have a mitzvah to be mafki, you would check out timely when the fruits come to the stage of Kiddush Shvi'is, and it is only then that you could be mafkir. So all these sources prove Shvi'is is definitely Hefkata de Malka. But then we need to come back and understand the Beis Yosef, which seems strange. The Beis Yosef says, Rachmone Afkara. But because the owner isn't mafkir, Chaybe to Misamaisis. Would we say the same by Hefker Gomer? Person was mafkir a field, and it's potem into Misamaisis because Hefker is potem into Misamaisis. And a bully doesn't let anybody into the field. He's violent. He attacks anybody that comes close to the tree because he wants to take all the fruit for himself. Would we say it's not Hefker and it's Chaybe to Misamaisis? Definitely not. Doesn't make sense. So what is the difference? If the Torah was mafkir, ma bekach that the Bailam is not mafkir. Let me share with you my ashkofa. It is Hefkata de Malka, Rachmona Afkara. But let me simply say, when a Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to let everybody collect the fruit of each and every individual, Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't need to deal with kinyonim. Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't deal with chaloisim, like Yeshiva Bochum. Kodesh Baruch Hu simply says, anybody could collect any fruit. It's not that the Torah invalidates Balus, ownership. The Torah says the ownership isn't relevant. Yes, the fruit belongs to Reuven or Shimon or Levi Yehuda, but it doesn't matter. So the Torah doesn't need to annul their ownership and make Hefker. Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't deal with Kinyonim. Kodesh Baruch Hu simply says, yes, the fruit belongs to Reuven, it belongs to Shimon, but anybody has the right to just take whatever you want. So the Hefker of Shvi'is is a metzius of Hefker, not a lumdish legal concept of Hefker. So a person is mafkir his field, it's Hefker, and it's potem and tumas amaisis, even though he or anybody else doesn't let anybody go into the field. Doesn't change the halacha. It's Hefker, potem and tumas amaisis. So if you could sneak under the fence, you could take whatever you want. But Hefker, Rachmona Afkara, is different. It's not that he's not the owner. He is the owner, but his ownership isn't relevant. And therefore, he is the owner. And if he doesn't let anybody come into the field and take fruit, it comes back to the chiyuv of Tumas Amaisa. That would be my interpretation of the Bis Yosef. And it's a big chiddush. And therefore, the Bis Yosef is mesupik, and the Bis Yosef has fallback position. Even if we do say Rachmona Afkare, and it should be potem et tumas amaisas, regardless of the owner's conduct, that is only a Jewish field. But a Goyish field, he's not mitzuvah in Shvi'is, and therefore the Torah doesn't invalidate his ownership, and the Torah is not mafkir his peiros. That it would be my understanding in the Bis Yosef. So in my opinion, there is no chiyuv to be mafkir peiros. The chiyuv is just pull back and let anyone take whatever he wants. I think there's only one tree in Yerushalayim which is already Hefker. So anybody that visited my home in the past month, there's a big sign out of my house next to the door. There's a lemon tree in the backyard, and anybody that wants lemons could just knock on the door and take as many lemons as he wants. And why is that? All the Vadas Akashlos and all the Rabbonim, we know that none of the Peiros and Etzesol as of now has Kedusha Shvi'is. But my lemon tree is a strange lemon tree, and it gives fruit twice a year. And I checked Erev Rosh Hashanah, and I did not see any buds. And now they're beautiful lemons. So to me, it's a suffix. Maybe it does have Kedusha Shvi'is. So I am mafkir mesufik. So if anybody wants some beautiful lemons, he could come to my house. I hope there will still be some available after anybody wants to come in and take as many lemons as he wants. So that is the way I understand the aside of Hefker Peiros Shvi'is. And to me, this is appealing because the Chazon Ish Siman Yud Daled Ois Daled struggles with the Yerushalmi and Masechet Peach Esam Daled. The Yerushalmi says, Peiros Shvi'is are Hefker, even for animals. And the Chazon Ish argues, what's Shayach Hefker for an animal? Hefker is relevant to people that have monetary rights. If it's Hefker, he is entitled to take. If it's not Hefker, not. When you're mafker for people. What is shaykh to be mafker for an animal? The way I understand it, the Hefker of Shvi'is is not really Toiras Hefker in Lumdis in a legal term. It's just, you need to understand, you cannot execute and exercise your ownership. That is the concept. You need to pull back as if you're a stranger. You cannot exercise your right as an owner, and therefore you need to be mafkir, even the behema, because preventing anybody from coming into your field and enjoying that fruit, whether it's human or animal, is exercising your power as an owner. And that is against mitzvah satay. I am aware that Beth Hillel learns Hefker from Shvi'is. So let me make another point in the Dakos as a nuance. Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't need to deal with chaloisim. But actually, the result is a proper Hefker. Because if the Torah says anybody could take, and you don't have the right to exercise your ownership, your power, then the result is Hefker. And I wrote my Svarim in various different sources. Sometimes we find Hefker beli hafkora. Yush is a good example. So Rachmona Afkara is a mitzias. It's just a reality. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, whoever wants is entitled to take any fruit that grows in the land. It's not because there is no owner. His ownership isn't relevant. That is the point. And if the owner is a Shomer Torah, then the result is Hefker, like Yush, like Sefer Ta'inam, like Perurin in Masechet Pesachim Davav. So that is my fundamental understanding in the sugya of Peres Shvi'is. And therefore, in my opinion, there's no mitzvah to be mafkir. The mitzvah is just to pull back and do not exercise ownership. So in my new Sefer on Shvi'is, Siman Yud Beis, I discuss this topic at great length, and like the Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim, Yosem Amashikolosi b'Fenechem Kosov Kan, I apologize that today's sheet is so much shorter than usual because right now it's Thursday afternoon. I still have some shiurim to give, and we're waiting for snow, and tomorrow very early in the morning I am traveling to Europe. So I need to get out of Yerushalayim before the snow starts falling, and therefore I am very pressured with time. So I apologize that today's sheet is so much shorter than it usually is. But I do think that we were matzliach to define briefly, first of all, what I think is my opinion in this big discussion. Is it Afkata de Malka or not? And my interpretation of Afkata de Malka, which is different than the classical understanding of others. So this week is Parshas Mishpatim. Va'ela ha-mishpatim asher tosem b'fneihem. Everybody remembers Rashi. Ma harishonim misinai af elu b'sinai. What's the chiddush? Don't we know that all the Taryag mitzvahs are from Sinai? Goes without saying. Mai kumashmalan ma harishonim misinai af elu misinai. The other question is, we would expect the first posuk in Parshas Mishpatim to be Tzedek Tzedek Tirtov, Ushefatetem Tzedek, starts off with Eved Ivri. There must be something important and unique about Eved Ivri. The Ramban asked this question, and the Ramban writes that Eved Ivri, Romezes Dvorim Gedoylem B'Maaseh Bereishis. As we know, the Ramban was unique. He was a giant among giants. And the Ramban was the greatest Makubal of his generation, the philosopher, a Makubal, a Torah teacher, a Poisek. This mitzvah, Romezet Ledvorim Gedolim B'Maaseh Bereishis. But I would like to share my understanding. Many people have a mistaken conception that when we deal with Donomominus, it is all about just basic decency. You have to be honest and straightforward, like every decent human being should be. And many people think that the Midas Toivis are just about being nice and compassionate as every normal human being should be. And people don't appreciate that even the monetary mitzvahs and the mitzvah Sheben Adam L'Chavere are Kedusha, are Tahara. They are the word of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's not just about being nice and about being decent. It's not that the Torah comes to confirm what we would know without the Torah because we're decent human beings. No. The very first Medrash in Medrash Rabbah, at the beginning of Parshas Bereishis, the Torah omeres, Ani hoyisi klei u'manoso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I am the tool with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. When the king comes to build his palace, he doesn't build it by himself. Uman yeshlo. He has a contractor, he has a builder, he has an architect, he has an engineer. And those, they need a blueprint, they need papers, they need plans. Kach, Kodesh Baruch Hu Omer. Istakel b'terose v'boro elamai. Hoy HaKadosh Baruch Hu mabit b'terose v'boires olam. And the Zohar goes beyond the Medrash Rabbah. Toch hazi. Kad boy HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'salek berusei kamel mivrei alma. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided, Olo beretzoinoi, to create the world. Aber mistakel b'yoraisa. V'kol uvde de Baruch HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything, every creation, every creature, have a mistakel b'yoraisa v'boro lei. It's not just a general overview. It's all the details. Nothing was created, only from the Torah. So my feeling is, it is only when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said in the Aseres HaDibros, Lo Sinaf, that Niyuf became wrong and repulsive and evil. It is only when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Lo Tignoivo, that stealing became unethical. Stealing became wrong. Stealing became evil. Human nature, human decency, human compassion comes from the Torah. It is the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created man. So the Torah comes before the Midas. And the Torah is the basis of honesty and decency and compassion and just being kind. Istakel bo'oraisa v'bora alma. Ma elu mesinai af elu mesinai. Baruch Hashem, there's a wonderful new Minchas Osher coming out, Bekorav, and that is a Masechet Weiss. Very much looking forward. I think it's an amazing sefer. And in the very first chapter, I discussed the name. Why is this Masechet of all the others called Weiss? And why does this Masechet start off with Shasheres HaMesorah, Moshe Kibbel Torah Messina, Mesorah Yeshua, Yeshua is a Canaan. We would expect that to be either the beginning of Shas or the end of Shas, not a middle of Seder Nezikin. I think that's the same idea. Because you come to think, Masechet Avos is just about being a nice man. And if you're nice, you don't need to learn Masechet Avos. If you're honest, you're nice, you're loving, you're compassionate. No. Ma'elu mesinai afelu besinai. And Chazal are the ones who teach us how to be nice and how to be compassionate. And one of the implications and manifestations and the hanhaga of Midas Toivus. Ma'elu mesinai afelu besinai. And that is why this Masechet of all the others starts off with Avos Olam, to emphasize that you need to learn Torah Midas from your Rabbeim, from your Gedolim. And Moshe Kibbel Torah Messinai, Mesorah Yeshua V'Shun as a Canaan, V'Yezenim V'Naviyim V'Naviyim Lan Sheknes Agdoila, and that includes Masechet Avos. It includes Mishpatim. Ma'elu Messinai Af'elu Messinai. Yesoid V'Shoresh Avodah has an amazing point that he makes in the first Shar Aleph Perek Ches. So many Hasidim, and today not only Hasidim, before performing certain mitzvahs, they say L'Shem Yichud Kiddush U'Berichu. Or at least they say, Hineni Muchan L'Kai Mitzvah to say, before Matzah, before Morah, before sitting in the Sukkah, before Dalad Minim. Every day in the morning, before Baruch Shema, we say, Hareini Mezamen Espi L'Hoides U'Lahalal. So the Shoresh Avodah says we should say the same when we prepare a cup of tea for our father or a coffee for our mother. Or we go to the shop to buy some things for the home because your mom or your dad asked you to do so. Or buy a Shoves Aveda. Same Kedusha, same Tahar. It's not just about being a mensch. And maybe that is why Ve'era Mishpatim starts off with Eved Ivri. Eved Ivri proves that what the Torah demands is not just being decent. It goes far beyond that. The Gemara in Kedusha says, if you have one pillow, one cover, one blanket, and it's either you or the Eved comes before you. I think fundamental decency would demand share if you have two. But why would he come before me? I'm the master. He's the slave. He's my possession. But the Torah says no. Kol hakoine eved ivri la'atzmo kekoine odoin la'atzmo. It is as if he's the boss. If you have one, you need to give it to him. You're going to sleep on the floor. You're going to shiver from cold. Your servant, your Eved, is going to have the benefit of your pillow, of your blanket. And that proves Midas Tov is not just be nice. It goes far beyond that. And it is from our Gedolim that we learn how, what fashion we need to interact. What are the Midas Tovs? And the basic honesty and decency of Mishpatim. Eila Mishpatim asher tosem b'fneihem. In my Sefer and others, I think I wrote an amazing thought. Sanedi Yudalev. There's a Gemara, and I don't recall any similar Gemara, neither in Bavli nor in Yerushalmi. Gemara tells a story. Pa'amachas nechnes Rabbeinu HaKodesh, Rabbi lebeis hamedrash, ve'hirgish reach shel shum, Omar, mi she'ochel shum yetzei. Rabbi couldn't stand garlic, and he felt the smell of garlic, and he said, please, the one that ate garlic, will you please leave the room? Reb Chia's greatest Talmud left the room. And everybody left after him. The other day, Reb Shimon Berebi found Reb Chia, and he was angry with him. Atu hu she'tzi'arto la'abi, you caused so much pain and embarrassment to my father. Why did you eat garlic? You know that my father can't stand garlic, and it nauseates him. And Reb Chia says, do you think I would do that? I would never eat garlic before coming into the shiur. So why did he leave the room? Shelo levayesh es mi she'ochel shum. I didn't want the person to be embarrassed and ashamed. So I shamed myself by leaving the room. And the Gemara says, asks, Reb Chia menayin lo? This is an amazing teaching. Where did Reb Chia pick it up? He learned from Reb Meir. Pa'amachas nichnasu isha lebeis hamedrash v'amru, Rabbi, echad mekem kiddushani b'biyah, omed Reb Meir v'nosan laget, amdu kol hatalmidim v'nosan laget. So Reb Meir did the same. He didn't want to shame that bad Talmud that had intimacy with this lady. Totally unacceptable. But Rabbi was chas al kavoidoi. And the Gemara asks, Rabbi menayin lo? Shmuel HaKotten. Shmuel HaKotten menayin lo? Shechanya ben Yechiel. How did he know? Yeshua ben Nun goes all the way back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Reb Chia was the greatest Amoira. He formulated all the brises. Reb Meir was the greatest Talmud of Reb Akiva. That's the Gemara native in Yud Gimel. Stam Mishnah Reb Meir. Never does the Gemara question their wisdom. Menayin loi? It is only here. Because we're dealing with Midas Tovs. So when two mitzvahs or two halachas contradict one another, we have a set of fixed rules. But when two moral values, ethical principles contradict one another, we don't have a fixed set of rules. On one hand, what a great mitzvah is to save a person from shame, from embarrassment. But on the other hand, you cannot tarnish your own name. You cannot hurt your own reputation. And this was Reb Chia's dilemma. If I just stay seated, somebody will be shamed. He will need to leave the room. If I walk out, I could salvage him from that embarrassment. But then Reb Chia, the Rebbe, and the other disciples would be angry at me. To decide what to do, we need to look up. So Reb Chia learns from Reb Meir. Reb Meir had the same dilemma. He learns from Shmuel HaKotten, Shechanya, Yeshua, up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ve'ela Mishpatim asher tosem b'fneihem. Ma'elu mesinai af elu mesinai. We need to learn from our great Gedolim. And we need to appreciate that these are just as important as those. Like the Ramban teaches us in Parshat Yisroi, why were there two luchos and not one? First one is dedicated to Ben Adam Lamokum, the other to Ben Adam Lachavere, and they were the same weight, same texture, same size. They look the same to teach you, same in value and in significance. Our Torah is based on two pillars, Ben Adam Lamokum and Ben Adam Lachavere. Ma elu mesinai af elu mesinai. Yerotzen should always have the schus of being Mekayim Kol Mitzvahs Hashem Ulakabel Ol Malchus Shemayim B'Yavo. Have a beautiful Shabbos.